Welcome back. I've got Eric Stone on the line. Eric, how are you today? Now the audio's cut out. That's
Oh,
strange.
you know what? It somehow went to mute. I'm doing great if you can hear me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we that's good. Yes, technology is great when it works, but when it doesn't, boy, it doesn't. So, why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
You got it. So, listen, always fascinated with business. Grew up, my dad was a textile salesman. My mother was a teacher, and I used to eavesdrop when my dad would come home from a long business trip that he'd travel on and hear all the ins and outs of business. And pretty soon I was hooked on business, loved it. Was the odd jobs kind of kid, created my own little business growing up, stayed true to loving business, went to school for business and landed in a company called Enterprise Rent-A-Car at the time. One of four people in an office, no idea what I was doing, but knew I was in the right place, learning about sales and service and people development. And fast forward, I was able to kind of climb that corporate ladder and have a chance instead of being one of four to eventually leading a few hundred people and leading the Southern New England region at my last stop. And we were fortunate to be considered one of the most balanced regions within the company. From that experience, I felt I had more to give. And so I created an outline, never thought I'd write a book, created an outline of the things that either through interviews with other people or my experiences of what is this thing called culture and how do we get this high performance? Created an outline, found a publisher. Next thing you know, a book comes out. So I now use that book, whether it's speaking or consulting, to share the message.
It's amazing. When I talk to people that write books, a lot of them, never really had it as a desire or wasn't even on their bucket list or even a thought of writing a book. But all of us have experiences, and those experiences can help others, because it's unique to us. It's, what you experience and what you did in leading the teams at Enterprise. And, we said this a little bit in the pre-show about, you can lead organizations without making people want to quit in mass quantities because we see that. We've seen it over the last few years where the COVID pandemic, the Great Resignation, retention numbers are insanely low. Engagement is atrocious. It's a wonder that anybody's working anywhere, but we kind of need to, and we should. We should work. We're built to create and design things for the greater good, and I think in many cases, the environments that are thriving are the ones that create an environment for people to thrive. Yes, they're productive. Yes, they generate a lot and they're really successful, but they're having fun doing it. So I think that's something that I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Well, yeah, listen, I think it's really interesting. I do in my travels the common thing if I'm speaking, whether it's in an association or working with a company, is people are so frustrated they can't keep people, or they can't find the right people. And yet, as you look under the hood, there's some glaring things that stand out with those who are doing it really well. And there's usually just a couple of simple things that they do. I mean, they're building strong relationships within the organization. So I know it sounds simple, that yeah, you got to create strong relationships. The question is many organizations don't come up with the behaviors and tuck strategies under what does that mean along the onboarding and training and development process. And so what do you do? What are those three initiatives you'll do to create those strong relationships? Or you move on to communication. I mean, I can't tell you how many countless people you ask them what they think they're supposed to do is one answer, and what their boss might tell them is quite different. And so the organizations who do really well, again, crystal clear, they amplify the right message, they buffer the noise. I call it the distraction catcher. And then they convey the did you knows type of things. And so, yeah, it is so critical now with five generations in the workplace, all valuing different aspects of what's important to them in the workplace, where younger generations value purpose-driven work. And maybe an Xer like me is a little bit more about other things. I was all about money, frankly, in the beginning of my career, and that was okay. But you got to balance those things within your business environment. And then, of course, the flexibility debate. You got the in-person, remote, and hybrid. What's the best way to be innovative, collaborative, and making people feel good about it? And just being very crystal clear on who you are of whatever direction you go. And so it's this topic has gone front and center.
Yeah, it's long overdue, and we see a lot of organizations struggle. And I love how you mentioned the five generations. A guest I had on the show a while back, John Shepard. He has a law firm, and he's got multiple generations in there, and everybody has different needs. They have different desires, but they also have different skill sets, and they also have some amazing insights and ideas on how to do things. And creating that environment where people feel free to communicate and share what they're thinking helps those organizations grow and thrive and adapt no matter what's thrown at us, whether it's a pandemic or economic downturn or international trade issues or wars or you name it. There's never a shortage of things to keep us occupied. But I think for organizations to really thrive, it's simple to communicate, but it's also simple not to. And I think a lot of organizations, like you mentioned a moment ago, just assume, oh, they know what they're doing, and I know what I'm supposed to be doing, even though the boss says, no, that's not actually what you're supposed to be doing. And it reminds me a conversation I had many, many, many years ago. I worked for a telco company for a period of time, and I remember the sales guy, really good sales guy, and love the guy. Name was Jim, and one of the reasons why I liked the guy was he was a straight shooter. He wasn't your quote unquote typical salesperson that would just sell it just to get it out the door. No, he knew the stuff. He knew what it did. He knew what it wouldn't do, and he wouldn't tell people that it wouldn't do this because he had a framework. He says, you know what? You do things right the first time because otherwise you're going to be doing it at least three times. You're going to have to, you did it wrong the first time, then you're going to have to do it again to undo what you just did. And then the third time, hopefully you're going to do it right that time. So you just did, you 3x'd the time that you spent on something. If you'd done it right the first time, you could have been working on something else. So, get everything in line and that takes effort and it takes time. And I know in this rat race of life, there's so many organizations, we got to get this out right away. Do you want to get it out right away or do you want to get it out right?
Yeah,
And
I
and
couldn't
that's
agree
go ahead.
more. I mean, there is, I did a post on LinkedIn a while back, and I said, the biggest reason why a meeting would fail, and everyone is coming up with all these wild reasons, and it's because of the rollout. You come up with this new initiative, you try, unfortunately, it is rushed. You don't think through all the ways to communicate that initiative, so it is truly within the fabric of the organization. And I'll give you a quick example. We at one point were struggling with sales, and we created this new content that we found. And so the question is just how do we truly not just do a one-time training? How do we build it in from the new hire all the way through the life of the employee? They each will get a different experience of that training because sometimes you're not ready for all of it. And so then we do a rollout for each level, which took time. I mean, it's hard once you have the right thing. And this was about personality styles that we were really struggling with. And we wanted to be able to have our team adapt to all these varying rebuttals that would happen. So once we did the training and had all levels, we kind of had a post homework assignment. Now you've got to go back and demonstrate how you've been able to execute these behaviors. And we want to share some of the successes. Some of the successes would be kind of that victory of the month that you'd get nominated for. The other thing we ended up doing is we would have, because we had 50 brick and mortar stores, is we then said we want each lower level, quote unquote, maybe entry level is a better word, position to explain how they've used it themselves. It was just constant reminder of what we're doing. So from the training to the reinforcement and over the shoulder right here, it's called the hourglass. That's actually something I write about. And it's approach of how you take an initiative through the top of an hourglass. So that's like the discovery phase we were doing for the personality styles. And you're pulling all the information from your clients, vendors, employees, board members, and you're pulling it at the top of that hourglass. And as the hourglass comes out, you're taking all these ideas, a whole lot of them, to eventually it synthesizes. And if you remember before, I said the ABCs, That's where you're going to amplify the message, right? That's the 3 to 5 or this initiative on personality styles. And then as it bows out, you've got to reinforce. And so this hourglass the mess, now it lets it reinforce to the remainder of the team. And once it lands, you assess in whatever way you deem necessary to assess. Each side of the hourglass, Michael, has mission, vision, values, and policies and procedures, and those are your guiding forces to the decisions you make. And right when you think you have it, right, you got to turn the hourglass over. You might have to start over because a problem, technology might happen, something might get in the way. And so it's a simple approach to your original story of how you can take this to make it stick and don't rush the rollout.
This is so important. It reminds me, and I've shared this before, many years ago, I worked for asset management division of Mercedes-Benz, and we would work with external clients on their asset management for their organization because that's a big financial statement item. A lot of organizations, especially large scale organizations, may not have a really good grasp of what do we actually have, when it comes to computers, desks, equipment, all that kind of stuff. So we would go in and implement a system that helped them keep better track of it for depreciation purposes, taxes, and all that good stuff. And one of the things we did as a team is at the end of every project, we would meet, like, which is not out of the ordinary, but we would also bring in some project management and project team members from other projects that had nothing to do with that project. They didn't know anything about it. And what we do, they would sit in on the meeting. We would share the highs and the lows and what we learned, and those outside people would contribute on things that they've seen with the projects they're working on. We did this over a few months, and then basically by doing this, we found so many efficiencies in what we could do on that that we were able to increase the number of clients that we took on to work on this by 20%. We didn't hire an additional consultant. We did
Yeah.
all that. Now, needless to say, the folks in Germany were quite pleased with that, and they were like, "How did you do this? How did you
Yeah.
find this efficiency?" It's like, we talked. And I know this is weird. We actually communicated and shared ideas, and we had a space where people could do that. And we grew it, and it was one of those things. I was obviously, that was quarter century ago now, but I still look at that and go, that was so instrumental in my approach of how I do things. And I think that's a great segue to your book. And we talked about it a little bit, but let's walk through the book. It's you obviously decided, okay, I'm going to take all these experiences and the conversations and all of that and put it together in the book. So let's flush out the book. What does it cover? I don't want to say it's like asking who's your favorite kid, but is there a particular section of the book or a chapter that really jumps out at you? It's like, okay, this if you're going to read one section of this book, this is the one. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the whole premise is when you're building culture, it's a bit of a journey, and so the metaphor is a road trip throughout the book, and it goes from choosing your passengers carefully, to, in other words, the hiring process, to that training and development. In other words, who do you want along on that road trip? To there's going to be roadblocks on the road trip, those obstacles, or I call them the distraction catchers. How do you stay clear of all that? To creating and scaling and creating culture carriers, expanding the people who might be in your car, all the way to a measurement of workplace culture. And that's called the 6 point inspection. Shocker, on a road trip and a car related thing, the 6 point inspection. So there's just a variety of different approaches that I wanted to take people along of how do you truly go not just in one direction, but there are so many facets to building culture. It's very similar to how do you get in shape or how do you build wealth? And the true answer is slowly. You're most people know what to do. They don't necessarily know how to do it. And I think that's what this book provides. What makes it a little unique, I think, would be its practicality. So when you go, it's not theoretical, it is actually a practical approach to taking initiatives and somehow putting it through the fabric of your organization and creating values that are truly in action, where you're not just, as they say, listing the values, but living your values. And I think the approach is getting more popular now, but you can be empathetic and very accountable. You can have high character with extreme high standard. And so it's a little bit of that journey along the way that hopefully allows people to truly have their, or at least my approach to it, stick.
And it reminds me, and people ask me, what's, one of my favorite business books of all time. And, I tell them the Tortoise and the Hare. And they go, what? That's not a business book. It's like, oh, yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's a reminder of slow and steady wins the race. And because you're able to pivot. Now, that doesn't mean you just go sloth speed on everything. In business, you have to make some decisions quick based on limited information. It's just going to happen. You do the best, based on your experiences and everything else. But it's a reminder that you got to have to, focus. And if you have a plan and a system in play, you're going to be okay. And yes, you're going to have to adjust and be accountable, but yes, being an empathetic leader, but a leader that can like hold you accountable and say, no, we need to do this. We have to hit these numbers. If we don't, well, you're not going to be here, and it's, I think of Alan Mulally when he took over Ford Motor Company and, all the reports he was getting were like, oh yeah, we're doing great. We're doing great. It's like, how come we lost 2 billion last year if we're doing great? That's not great. And then finally, someone had the courage to actually give a true report of how bad it was, and he stood up and applauded and was thrilled that they actually were brave enough to come. Next week, everybody came in with their true reports, and then finally they got to see, okay, this is where we actually are right now. Okay, now that we know where we are, what do we need to do to get to where we want to be? And again, you can do that in a variety of different ways, but I find that people, especially, the generations today, are more in tune to listen if you are empathetic with them, but hold them accountable too. And
Yeah.
it's a as much as we love to set it and forget it, that's not how life is. There's times where you have to press down on the pedal, there's times you have to ease up. There are times where you have to be more firm with an employee and maybe scale it back. But understanding that employee, understanding, what's going on in their lives external to work without knowing all the details, it goes a long way in helping you be the more, quite frankly, in my opinion, a more well-rounded leader.
Yeah. And to answer also, I don't know if I touched on it, but so what is my favorite part of the book, which, like you said, is really hard to it's really hard to choose. I would say the feedback I've gotten a lot was there's a lot to take away from hiring for match and the semantics of difference between match and fit, which in my opinion, there's a big difference. So in other words, when you're hiring for fit, it's, I need a size 8 shoe, and you're a size 8. And Match is really the one who knows how to truly ask the right questions, teach their people of how to ask the right questions, and is able to take a beautiful tie that makes the shirt, the pants, and everything else pop. And so there's a big part of what are some ways that you could truly hire for Match? Because there's two things, right? I can't get enough people, we'll hire the right ones, and I can't keep them, we'll engage them. And then so that's the second part that I lightly touch. I probably could have hit it more is these factors of engagement that were built in to our philosophy and principles that everyone had to understand. And then if there was a third, the measurement part. Like, how do you check the health of your organization, which is actually my last chapter, and that's that 6-point inspection. So there's a few things. It really is hard to pick one, but those are a few.
Yeah, but those are all critically important, and in certain times you work in certain areas, and other times you work in other areas. But if you follow those points and you implement this and make it part of the DNA of the organization and how you lead, it's easy for you to flow in between all of those different things when it's needed. You'll recognize it. It's like, okay, looks like I need to do this. Okay, we'll do this. And again, going back to the communication component of it, when everyone knows what they're doing and having feedback and being able to share what they're working on, be comfortable in sharing, I'm struggling with this. Okay, well, let's get you some help because I don't want an employee to struggle. That doesn't do me any good. I want them to thrive. Okay, if they're struggling, okay, what are we struggling on? Okay, let's see if we can find some help. Maybe we offload some of that to somebody else that's good at that, or we bring in an additional resource to work with you on this to get through it. Figure out what those hurdles are, because ideally, as a leader, you're to lead. And what are you leading? You're leading people to be better. You want them to be better. You want them to thrive. If they thrive, yes, there's a chance they may leave, but they're leaving for a better opportunity because as a leader, you've set them up for success. And I've shared this story a few times. I worked in healthcare for almost 2 decades, and in a primary care setting and multiple sites and all of that. And I hired this receptionist that had zero healthcare experience, which I thought was pretty cool of me because when I went into the sector, I had zero healthcare experience. So it was like, I'm kind of paying it forward in a way. And, the doctors are like, are you out of your mind? Why are you hiring somebody that has zero healthcare experience? She's not going to know this, how to book appointments. It's going to be a disaster. So, but I said, you know what? She's going to learn it. I know she's going to learn it because she worked in retail for a cell phone company. So she gets disgruntled, angry people all the time because they're upset with their cell phone bill or they don't like their phone or all that. So she's constantly getting beat up. So she's going to get that from patients because patients are sick. They don't feel good. So they're naturally, unfortunately, a little more rude to the help than they need to be. But long story short, she thrived. She grew. She was amazing at it. Now, she had a long commute to our clinic. And then one day I was talking with a colleague that had a sister clinic that was 20 minutes from where she worked or where she lived. And they were looking for, a receptionist slash office management type of role. And I knew that this individual had grown to be able to do that role. So I called the director and I said, I haven't talked to her yet, but I have somebody here that's an all-star. Now, I don't want to lose her, but she lives 20 minutes from you, and she's making a commute that's almost an hour each way to get here. I said, I'll talk with her, see if she's interested. Would you interview her? I cannot give her a higher recommendation. She's amazing. Yeah, I'll definitely want to talk to her. Okay. So I talked to her, and she's like, but I love it here. This is great. And I said, I know, but you'll gain 40 minutes minimum a day of your life back just in cutting out the commute. So you can sleep in, you can get to home earlier. There's think about it. So she took a couple days, said, okay, I'll have the conversation. Long story short, she was offered the role, she accepted it. So the doctors who were mad at me for hiring her because she didn't know what she was doing were then mad at me because I let her go. And it was like, I
Yeah.
can't win with these guys. But I did that because I knew I invested in her, made sure that she had everything she needed to do the job well. She was so good, she ended up taking a promotion. Later on, she ended up running that clinic. So
Yeah,
she went, go ahead.
two interesting things with that story. One is, and I fell into the wrong trap early in my interviewing career when I was interviewing, is you get too caught into, hey, we're just looking for those in management or sales. And some of my best hires actually had a psychology degree or a journalism. And I was shocked. Now, this was for entry level stuff, for a management trainee position at that time. But it was very eye-opening, which goes to you got to ask the right questions to really truly understand what they're capable of. I call it coachability. And how can you, in your interview questions, find out if someone is coachable? And I'll talk about that. The other thing that was important, my son's actually doing interviews for a position today. And you talked about really the power of recommendations. And so outside of an interview, when someone goes to you and says, listen, Eric is a rock star, that really bumps a lot of the credibility up. So even if the interview wasn't perfection, which it's hard to have, goes to the point of those recommendations are such an important part of knowing maybe their DNA of where they came from and having someone you truly trust recommend. And then you took the ability to say, I'm going to put their career above what I need. And so very few people unfortunately do that. So that's a great story.
Yeah, more people need to do that. It'll make for better places and we'll all benefit from it. So, Eric, love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
The easiest place is probably on LinkedIn. So I'm right on LinkedIn, and you can certainly try Instagram as I have begun my journey thanks to my daughter, but it's not, I don't have a whole bunch of followers yet. But LinkedIn would probably be the best. And you could always go to clearpathventures.com to learn about either speaking or coaching and things like that.
Yeah, definitely have all that in the show notes. So Eric, thank you so much for being you and this amazing work you're doing. I really appreciate your time today.
It was great to be on. Thanks a lot.